Anytime you're out of your comfort zone, that's awesome. It doesn't matter if it's someone else's mundane. If you're out of your comfort zone, you're living a more adventurous life.
Today, we are diving deep with Adam Darrow, author of Seek the Risk. This isn't just a book about thrill-seeking. It's a powerful memoir of personal growth, vulnerability, and the challenges of living authentically.
Part of the whole life philosophy of seek the risk, not the reward, is like all the negative or all the difficulties, all the friction you feel as you're trying to achieve something. That's where the real gold is.
Adam shares his journey of redefining masculinity, from conquering extreme sports to navigating a groundbreaking non-monogamous relationship. He opens up about confronting fear, jealousy, and societal expectations, all while uncovering deeper truths about himself.
Opening up a relationship is not a way to save a relationship any more than having a baby is a way to save a relationship. I found out some things from my childhood that were really powerful and that had been holding me back for my entire life.
Get ready to explore what it truly means to seek the risk, not the reward, and discover how embracing discomfort can lead to profound transformation.
I am trying to avoid the fear. I'm not accepting the fear. Start pushing yourself. Start getting out there. Start being forced to confront emotions you don't like. On one side, I've got bland masculinity. On the other end, I've got toxic masculinity. They're both extreme applications of valuable qualities. Too soft and you're bland, and too tough or aggressive and you're toxic.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Adam Darrow. He wrote a book called Seek the Risk, which is about not just thrill-seeking, but really challenging himself through growth, through going through things that are on the edge of his comfort zone. And it's also a story of his journey through non-monogamy. So it's a really interesting book, and I'm excited to dive deep into the themes that are presented there. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So tell me a little bit about the book. Like what inspired you to write this?
Well, what inspired me? Actually, it was the pandemic, just because I was sitting at home and had nothing to do. And a friend of mine, I told him the story, and he's an author. He's like, dude, you should start writing that into a book. And it started that simply. And I was just at home, so I started writing. And 2.5 years later, I had this crazy book.
So, okay, yeah, because I'm curious of like why people decide to capture their stories, because it is a memoir. We'll get into kind of the contents of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, were you hoping that people would read it, or you inspire others, or yeah?
I probably had some hubris when I started out of like, oh, people want to hear my story, and I started writing it from this position of let me tell you my experience. And then as I got back into it and started going over all the journal entries and such, I've always historically journaled a lot. And when I went back through all my journal entries and such, I realized that it was a much deeper story than just, hey, let me tell you how I navigated non-monogamy. It was really this story of how I got broken down and built back up, and how I found out things about myself that I never knew were there. I mean, obviously I knew that at the time, but it wasn't until I went back and really started reviewing it all that the book started taking on a much deeper, vulnerable, and more impactful story, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think the message of the book is really clear. And I think it's something that needs to be said time and time again. So I talked a little bit about it in the intro, but I'd love to hear it in your words of kind of if you were to encapsulate the overarching theme. How would you define seek the risk?
Right. And well, first, I just have to give a shout out here. I always historically called it experience hunting versus trophy bagging. And, but a woman who I actually consider to be the one great love of my life, she was the one who coined the term seek the risk, not the reward. And I use half of that in the title, Seek the Risk. And I just want to give her a quick shout out. But the idea of seeking the risk, not the reward. It's about living in a way that just continually promotes growth and discovering the things that may be holding you back from living your best life, right? In the book, I just use my non-monogamous relationship, so it's a bit salacious. But it's really about the non-monogamy opened up so much inside me and forced me to confront things about myself that I I didn't even realize were there. It was really painful at times. And I guess that's really the story about how I discovered parts of me, things that were buried in my psyche, even from childhood and from growing up, that were preventing me from living the best life I possibly could. And that, to me, was really interesting. And it wasn't until I was probably a good third of the way through writing the book that I really uncovered how valuable that stuff was and got it down on paper from all my journaling through the years.
Yeah. So can you share some of those things that you had to confront? We talk a lot on the show about like fighting your inner demons and facing your demons.
Right.
This is exactly what it is,
Right. So I guess, the story progresses as I start uncovering more and more stuff. And the book starts out with me prior to even the relationship. And I was in my 20s, I really got into extreme sports, competing and doing a lot of various things to make me seem more tough and masculine. I mean, I like doing them, but there was definitely an element of I was doing it for the second party validation. A lot of those activities provided for me. And so prior to the relationship, I thought I was doing things to say I climbed that, or I jumped off this, or I did whatever it was. And any fear or intimidation I felt to achieve those things was an obstacle in the way of the trophy that I was trying to get. I thought there was something wrong with me. But as I grew up, I started realizing that the adventures were actually more interesting because of that fear of intimidation, not in spite of them, and understanding my reactions to things provided a measure of growth. And so sinking into that and accepting it all of a sudden opened up. I could sink into the experiences so much more fully, and they could leave much bigger marks on my soul, basically, if I accepted all the emotions that came with them. So that was sort of my lead up into the relationship. I left extreme sports in my early 30s, at least as a competitor, and into the business world, and took a lot of those lessons and applied them to my professional world, which worked out great. And so by my mid to late 30s, I was arrogant and think, oh, I got all this. I've done all this stuff. I beat second party validation. So it's funny. I was arrogant in my lack of arrogance. And then I met Jane, a woman who I instantly fell for. I mean, she was the full package in so many ways. But she had this one quirk, if you want to call it. She was like, look, I only do extreme non-monogamy. I will never commit to only one person. We can be in a relationship, but I will only do this. And I was like, yeah, I got this, no problem. I've climbed rock faces without ropes. I've jumped off buildings with parachutes. Right? This is nothing. And boy, it completely broke me down. In a way, the shock to my masculinity, the self-image, the jealousy, how I saw myself in the org chart of the male world, especially in the sports I had been historically engaging in, which was all very tough guys trying to do tough things. And that was a huge lesson, seeing how much I created this story of my masculinity from the way other people saw me, and the non-monogamy blew that away. It was gone. And I had to start picking up the pieces. And then as I get further into it in the book, I start uncovering more and more layers underneath, and I start finding all kinds of things from my childhood, imposter syndrome and various other things that really contributed to it. So it was yeah, I mean, that's sort of the quick work of it, of the book, the overview.
Yeah. So how did it subvert your masculinity? Because I've heard that before. I've worked with, couples that have opened up and become polyamorous or, non-monogamous or whatever. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that happens where the sense of security that we kind of take for granted gets shattered. What was your experience?
It actually shattered a lot of femininity as well. It wasn't just masculinity, it was femininity. Because I met this woman, and I mean, she's from Eastern Europe. She was tall. She was absolutely model gorgeous. She was super brilliant. She was getting a PhD from an Ivy League university, spoke 5 languages. Every time I went out with her, introduced her to friends and family, people were just like, holy shit, Adam hit the jackpot. That this her whole non-monogamous side was purely private. And I was, to be fair, I was really enjoying all the validation I was getting from other people, how spectacular my partner was. due to who she, in the book, I describe her as a female empowerment sexuality activist. I mean, she's a sex educator. And so she's not private about anything. She's fully out in the open. And then once we really started having a relationship, she once on a certain social media platform, she announced to the world that we were in a non-monogamous relationship. And in like overnight, her value disappeared. Like, oh my God, she was labeled a slut, and her value as a partner went to nothing. All of a sudden I was, a sissy man who, people asked me, you let your woman fuck other guys? And I was like, oh man, I don't let her fuck other guys anymore. That I let her be female. It's just who she is. I got a tremendous amount of judgment from the outside world and from a lot of friends and family whose opinions I really respected. And so it was eye-opening to me about how in society, the stories we tell or the stories that we all accept about what you fit into in a lot of ways can define your masculinity. And I bought into that too. I didn't realize it until I had this experience. And I felt shame. I felt worthless. I felt like, who am I? What am I doing? And it forced me to sort of build back up and look for the markers that actually truly meant I'm a man and I am the things that I want to say with my masculinity. What kind of a man do I want to be? And that was a really, I have to say, that was probably the best piece of this entire journey, was learning how to love myself better and present who I wanted to be to the world. And those were the markers I looked at as to whether I'm a man or not, or what my masculinity is.
Yeah. So what are some things you left behind, and what are some things that you adopted? Because I hear what you're saying, right? It's like you get all that traditional masculinity just gets broken, where it's like that possessive form of relationship, right? Like having a kept woman, right? Having it, like you said, as a trophy versus a real relationship.
Right. So let's see, what did I leave? I mean, first, like I said, I had left in the sporting world. I had left the second part. I tried to leave the second party validation behind, and then I had to leave it behind in my relationship. But then there's the whole idea of, what does it mean to be masculine? I battled with some things I called, in the book I talk about the continuum, the masculinity continuum, where on one side I've got bland masculinity, on the other end I've got toxic masculinity. And they're both extreme applications of valuable qualities, but too soft and you're bland, and too tough or aggressive and you're toxic. So I probably was more toward the toxic side prior, just because of all the very male dominated sports I was competing in and participating in. So that was certainly one thing I had to leave behind. Defining my masculinity based on how hot or how desirable my female partner was. I had to leave that behind. And I also really recognize I want parts of all the different types of masculinity, like a perfect, but if there is such a thing, but where I want to exist on that continuum is a blend of the best pieces of all the various extreme examples of masculinity that's out there.
Yeah. What are the ingredients in that blend? Like, what would you say if you were to a value system or a prescription or something, right?
Vulnerability is, I never really thought, as growing up in more of a traditional kind of, I mean, it was the 80s when I grew up, so we didn't really quite have the progressiveness we have now. I'm a man. I'm not emotional. I don't show emotion. I'm stoic. I'm sturdy, and I'm aggressive, and I'm tough, and I'm competitive, and above all else, I have to win and show how strong I am. And there are pieces of each of those. So I want to show emotion. I want to, at the appropriate time, I want to be vulnerable. I want to show my softer side. And then at the same time, though, I want to show that I can also be tough and be the person that someone can count on to be the protector. So, the bland side of when you're too emotional, I needed to learn how to be more emotional, and I needed to learn how to be less aggressive and less of the more, the 1950s idea of a man, the lumberjack or whatever.
Yeah, the Clint Eastwood archetype, right? Or like, kind of like the bully, archetype. But yeah, I think like It's interesting because we're we're only different in like maybe half a generation. But I think as a millennials, like we went on the other side. We went more bland. We went more nice guy. I think as a reaction to a lot of those toxic masculine traits. So a lot of my work is like personally and with my guys is helping them be tougher, moving towards that middle. And I think you're right. Like, I think the versatility is what's critical, right? It's like having the right tool for the job and being able to like read the room and then apply it as necessary.
Yeah, I actually credit the book with moving me even further along that journey, because all the journaling I wrote was very personal and very emotional, and I really got in touch, but I never showed that side on the out to the world. And writing the book and getting it all out there. I mean, people have called it one of the most brutally honest narratives they've ever written. Because I really show some pretty intimate and vulnerable sides of myself. But doing that it helped me get to that next level. So I was very lucky. My editor was someone who's known me my whole life, and every time I tried to bullshit my way through something, he was like, "No, stop it! You're holding back."
Nice.
So it was absolutely fantastic experience.
Yeah. So I want to bring you back to what you said a little bit earlier about fear. And we doing all these like extreme sports things and climbing and base jumping and all that stuff, right? And it's like, I think a lot of guys, they feel the fear and they think they're a coward. Whereas what I hear you're saying, which is critical, right? Is like the fear is going to be there. It's more about taking it in and being open to it and then acting even though you're afraid. So can you say a little bit more about fear? Because I have so many clients that are like, because I'm afraid, I'm a coward.
Right. And, people have frequently said to me throughout my life, "Man, you're fearless. It's amazing what you do." And I am absolutely not fearless. I actually consider myself I have more fear than I think most, in my head anyway. Who knows if that's true, but fear can be incredibly handicapping too. It can cut you off from so much. And so that's the first step, understanding that fear doesn't always work in your favor, right? And I think I said in the beginning, I was talking about how once I realized that the fear and intimidation I felt made the adventures I was doing better. Like the adventures were better because of that fear and intimidation, not in spite of it, because I learned how to sink into it and to manage it. So the first thing I would say in answer to your question is accept that the fear is normal and you have it and it's okay. And it's very likely that being able to fully experience that fear is going to make the whole thing you're doing even better if you can figure out how to manage it, right? Once I accepted that fear is natural and even encouraged in many cases, controlling the fear and understanding it became an integral part of the experience, right? One thing I certainly do, I certainly experienced a lot in the extreme sports world is what I call the negative outcome fantasy, right? You have a situation and fear starts building in your head and you go down the death spiral and it just keeps building on itself and you create this fantasy, a negative outcome fantasy based on the fear. And that can be completely debilitating, especially if you're in a situation where you're climbing without ropes or whatever. That's an extreme example. But that same when I started recognizing how much fear was controlling, first in the business world, and then in the relationship world, when I got into this relationship, I was like, oh, this is exactly the same as what happens when I'm climbing or base jumping or whatever it is, right? How do I prevent the fear and then these negative visualizations of a terrible future from affecting the quality of my decision making in the present? So for anyone who does have fear, I'll say, look, if you got to sink into that fear and wrap yourself around it and try to understand where it's coming from. I mean, sometimes the fear is totally valid. Like I don't want to step off a cliff without a parachute for a very good reason. Right. I'm afraid to do that, right? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, this fear is there for a reason to protect us. But what I realized, and this was actually the key. This is so much of what the book was about, is that the fear that I was experiencing as I got deeper into this relationship, that fear was based on, I would say bugs or whatever, things in my psyche that were trying to protect me from seeing the real truth about myself. And once I understood that, fear can be protecting you from learning something about yourself that can be really uncomfortable. Once I started understanding that, I said, well, what's that fear hiding? And so I poked it. I went in further. I went in deeper. And part of the whole life philosophy of seek the risk, not the reward, is like, hey, that fear and all the negative or all the difficulties, all the friction you feel as you're trying to achieve something, that's where the real gold is. And you can learn a tremendous about yourself if you take the time to. So yeah, totally. Sink into the fear. That's what I'd say.
I believe men grow through challenge, and it's like challenges make us stronger. They, like I said, they show us parts of ourselves that we may be real uncomfortable with, and they force us to get out of our comfort zone. And what I see so much when I look out there is so many men that are not seeking the risk, that are not pursuing challenge. Because I think you could coast. I think it's very easy to coast in modern life, to live like a good enough life. And we have to bring challenge into our life, whether it be through sports or physical activity or emotional challenge or spiritual challenges or whatever, right? But we have to bring it in because it's not going to be there. Do you see that too when you look at kind of men outside right now? Is people that aren't seeking the risk, that aren't moving towards challenge?
I mean, I see that. I see that in a lot of people, not just men. I think I am particularly attracted to people who do seek the risks. So I have noticed that a lot of the people I choose to surround myself with have a similar life philosophy than I do. But I mean, especially since writing the book, I've been interacting with a lot of people who don't have that and have been asking me questions and emails, and I love talking to people about it. So I don't know if I would say men today do or don't. Certainly in the circles I run in, I get more people who do than don't, but I think everyone should embrace it at some level. Everyone's got their own line of what seeking the risk is. There's no, here is seeking the risk and here isn't. Anytime you go out of your comfort zone, you are seeking the risk. That's it. And one of the lines in the book is, I have tried to make a lifetime of getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Anytime you're pushed into a situation you're a little uncomfortable, that's learning, that's growing. And I never want to stop that. So,
yeah. So let me ask you this: how can someone determine the right level of risk? How does someone know what a risk is or not? How do they bring that into their lives?
Right. That's interesting. I'm definitely not a psychologist, but certainly every time I recognize that there's discomfort or fear around some engagement activity or social interaction, then that's your risk line right there, right? That's how okay, here we go. I'm uncomfortable to do this. Well, let me figure out why. That as soon as you've hit that line where you're out, you're no longer comfortable, that's when, and if you choose to step over that line, you are seeking the risk. I mean, it can be that simple. It can be as simple as walking into a room of people. And there's a situation in the book, I talk about going into a room of people, and there's someone in the room that everyone is kind of shying away from. And I have just met Jane, who's the person I really want to impress her. We're at this party, but I see this guy on his own by himself for a variety of reasons I won't go into. And all this fear is like, oh, I want to stay away from that guy. I don't want people to think I'm uncool. And then I'm like, fuck, I'm scared to go talk to him because I don't want to be judged. And so I went and talked to him, right? And ended up having a fantastic conversation with the guy. And my fears were telling me I was going to be judged by the room, but I was uncomfortable. I went and did it. And oddly, Jane saw who I went up and chose to talk to. She was unbelievably impressed that I chose to talk to someone who was by themselves and such. And it ended up having the exact opposite reaction of what my negative outcome fantasy had told me would happen. So seeking the risk can be something as simple as just doing something in a social situation where you're the only one who's really feeling that it's a risk, but it doesn't matter. That is seeking the risk right there. And I always tell people, if anytime you're out of your comfort zone, that's awesome. It doesn't matter if it's someone else's mundane. If you're out of your comfort zone, you're living a more adventurous life.
Yeah. I'm hearing like not letting fear and conformity win. Really finding a way of like expressing yourself and hunting down, stalking that fear. using it as something to move towards rather than the signal to like just back away and, you know, put the blinders back on.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, so you're in this world of non-monogamy, right? And you said it was new for you. It challenged a lot of assumptions. What types of people did you meet there? I mean, did you have like a mentor or like a guide, or was there anyone to help you through it, to help like navigate the wild world, or were you just like freeballing it?
No, I met Jane in 2006. So this was a while ago, and there wasn't, it seems like it's become very much in the mainstream, or at least it's talked about a lot more now than it was then. So
Right. There's like books and there's groups and there's all kinds of organizations. It's like way more
nothing
mainstream
like
now.
that.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, like I said, I had the hubris to think I could write something to help other people. And I think that's initially one of the reasons I started writing, is like, man, I wish I had a book like this when I started. So no, and I had no mentor. I had nothing. There were other people in the world, but they were very, very different. Just in a lot of ways, just different background, different way they saw life. There were a lot of people that it was their life, right? The non-monogamous world, the non-monogamous community was their entire life. And that wasn't me. It was just something that I was just in a relationship that was non-monogamous. It was, yeah, I was totally on my own. And I mean, that could also be because I felt like I was a tough guy and I didn't need anybody. So I fully recognized I probably didn't go searching for someone. I probably should have gotten a therapist at the time who was familiar with it, but I did not. And yeah, I was alone as I embarked on this journey. And like I said, I had the audacity to believe that this was going to be no problem for me.
So do you have a story that you could share, maybe from the book or just from your life, of kind of being humbled, I guess, or maybe an early encounter in the non-monogamous world that made you be like, take a step back and be like, oh, I gotta change a lot of stuff. I gotta just kind of challenges everything.
Well, I mean, let's see, a particular story. There's so many. I'll give a little bit of an overview. I mean, first there was the coming out party. What was funny is that when she posted this on the certain social media platform, they don't let that go out there until you approve it. And so I got this message late at night, in my apartment. Oh, Jane has said she's in a open relationship with you. Are you in an open relationship with Jane? I was like, cool with that? Yeah. I was like, God, and I'm like, yeah. Oh, and so that was the first major decision point for me. It was like, okay, if I say yes to this, I have a feeling my world's going to turn upside down, and it did. But I was like, well, how do you want to live? Are you going to let me, like I said, am I going to let fear about what's going to happen to this? So that was the first, and I did click, obviously, yes, and then my world turned upside down. But for the first few years of our relationship, Jane was up at school, finishing her PhD. We would see each other every other weekend, either in New York or up at the small town where she was getting her doctorate. And at the end of that, for those first 2 years, yes, we were non-monogamous, but we weren't living together. So we kind of had this, I said, listen, whatever you do on your own, that's fine. I don't need to know about it. When we're together, we are fully together. On the weekends, there's no, you're not going to go out and have sex with someone else while I'm up visiting you, or when you're down staying with me in the city. But when she graduated and she moved in with me, I had assumed that the non-monogamy would stop. And I think it's really common.
Yeah, it did not. Yeah.
And she had none. There's this scene in the book where she's up at her school and we're cleaning up in the kitchen, and she's like, God, I can't wait to be living in the city and have so many more men to choose from. And I was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? And she's like, oh, what, do you think I was going to change? And I was like, oh, I haven't really thought about it, which kind of was true because I just assumed she would. So that, and I leave her that weekend. And then the next chapter is all about me going through this incredible mental battle about what am I going to do? She's moving down, and I happen to do it while I'm riding through traffic in New York City on my bicycle the entire thought. There's a lot of crazy sports stuff going on. The whole thing is kind of bounces back and forth. But so that was one of the first really long discussions I had with myself about what do I want to do with my life? Who am I? I'm afraid of this. Why am I afraid of this? Is it how I want to live? Is it not how I want to live? You know, that's actually a really important point right there. It only makes sense to dive into things you're really afraid of if you think they might be how you want to live, right? If I absolutely knew, no way, I never want to do monogamy, it's not who I am, or I wasn't in, then there would have been no point. But I was honestly kind of curious about it. And it kind of seemed like it could be a lot of fun. So and I was like, well, if I'm going to say no to it, I want to make sure I'm saying no for the right reasons, not just because I'm afraid, right? Because the fear may not be based in anything, but stuff left up in my psyche from childhood or whatever, who knows? So that was really an important discussion that I learned with myself. It's like, make sure if I'm doing something that's pushing, it's getting me out of the comfort zone, is because it's not a violation of who I am as a person, right? So that was a big episode for me when moving in, and she's like, yeah, of course I'm going to keep doing this. The next big one after that, I won't go through the whole thing, was the fact. So Jane was a very interesting person. One of her love languages was actually sharing all of her sexual exploits. Like she was just an incredibly sexual person. And my initial thing when she was at school and I was down in the city was, okay, don't ask, don't tell, whatever's going on, I don't need to know. But when she moved in, that really wasn't going to be possible. So I travel a lot for work. So I basically told her, I was like, okay, kid, could you just be non-monogamous when I'm traveling?
When you're not around.
Yeah, when I'm not around. And to her credit, she agreed. She's like, that's fine. I mean, I was traveling 50% of the time, so she had plenty of opportunity. But the problem was, and to her credit, she's right, I wasn't getting all of the person I was in love with and living with. I was only, there was a whole part of her I didn't want to know about. And that bugged her, rightly so. And she's like, look, if you want to be with me, you got to be with all of me. And she really wanted to tell me about all the exploits she was having, because like I told her about my climbing adventures. To her, it was the same thing, right? So I had to start listening to those stories. And that was brutal. That started taking me down. I was broken. It was making me jealous. It was making me question everything. It was questioning myself, my masculinity. I kept thinking she's going to leave me. All these negative outcome fantasies kept flooding in. The worst part is that to her, that was a way she got closer to me. And to me, it pushed me further away. But what was funny is that every time we're having an intimate moment, a lovely date, we're out, we're having a sexy dinner, a bottle of wine, candlelit. To her, that's the perfect time to tell a story about the threesome she had with these two guys last week. And to me, it was like the absolute worst. So that took some doing, getting through all that.
Yeah, that's hard, man. That's so hard. That's going to be like, spike of insecurity or being like, is this cheating? It's like, for some people, this is definitely cheating. But for me, I agreed to it. Like, do I really care about this? Like,
right.
Yeah, I think that would throw me for a loop. Similar to you, I'd want it like as contained as possible, right? But then, you're like sacrificing that intimacy. Yeah.
Well, it broke me down. And that's actually the turning point in the book. She's sharing these stories at random times, and I'm like, do I leave this relationship? And that's kind of sort of where I say, okay, I need to start sinking into seek the risk, not the reward. I'm like, I am trying to avoid the fear. I'm not accepting the fear. And so that point, I was like, okay, this is hard. This is like learning a new sport in an extreme environment. I have to really start understanding and learning, and I have to control the risk. And so that's what happened. I say, look, if we're going to do this, I need these sharing times to be contained in a very specific night. It's only going to, I come home from a trip for a few weeks and we do it on a certain night, and then it's over. And then I know exactly what I'm getting, and allow me to process a lot better. So that's how the journey started, when I started really applying all the lessons I had learned in my previous life of the extreme sports to this extreme relationship. And that's when everything started getting better.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. Started moving. Yeah. Well, did you start dating other people? Like, when did you start experimenting with non-monogamy?
Yeah, so I want to be clear. I was being non-monogamous, just not as much as she was, but I had my fun here and there.
Okay.
It's I was fine with me being non-monogamous. There was no emotional hit for that.
No problem there. Yeah.
Which I talk about in the book. I'm like, when I would get so upset at hearing hers, I'm like, this is crazy. That's one of the reasons I kept going. And I recognized that this was not, this was based on fear that wasn't valid, because if my love for her cannot change if I hook up with someone else, I should be able to feel that with her. Why can't I? And exploring that question, I found out some things from my childhood that were really powerful, and that had been holding me back for my entire life, holding me back from living the best life I possibly could. And there's a lot of stuff about imposter syndrome. There's a lot of stuff feeling not good enough. I was a redhead. I know I'm bald now, but growing up as a redheaded kid, being teased constantly, and all that stuff I've been carrying with me. And it was really this relationship that got me to see how much I'd been carrying with me, and how much I was just afraid of losing a relationship that I had because I wasn't good enough, or eventually she's going to realize I'm still that geeky redheaded kid on the playground. And I always knew, one of the things I knew I was going to come out, when I embarked on this journey, is that there was a very good chance I was going to come out of, I say, a fantastically better version of myself. And that's what happened. I learned how to confront a lot of things that were holding me back. And that was beautiful.
Yeah. So what has that given you now? I mean, who is the man that you are now? And what are some of the freedoms that you've gained from going through this trial?
Yeah, I'm perfect now. I'm all done. It's great. I have no more growth to do.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Nailed it. Yeah. Nailed the dismount. I'm done. Mic drop. I have, and it's interesting. It was writing the book that really helped solidify it all. But I now keep all these lessons in the forefront of my head as I'm going through life and navigating the inevitable ups and downs and crazy stuff that we all experience if we're out interacting with other humans and other people. So looking at the rich tapestry of my life and what I'd accomplished and what I've done, and the incredible friendships that I've developed and throughout my life, keeping all that stuff in my head is how I battle the negative emotions, the negative outcome fantasies, the negative thoughts, the death spiral. I want to be clear. I didn't cure myself of having the thoughts. What I did was I found the right way to deal with them. Right? The imposter syndrome is always going to be there. So I do it. The thinking I'm still a redheaded kid on the playground. My head still thinks that. But when that starts happening, and when I fall down from that, it's much easier now to pick myself back up and remind myself, look at my life, look at what I've done, look at the people that seem to like me, that I like them. Look at these incredible friendships. Throughout the book, I talk about how important my friendships and the relationships in my life are. And I say relationships above all else, and reminding myself of that is how I get through the tough times. And, in terms of masculinity, it's funny, right? I wrote this book and I poured myself out it's like I said, people have said it's brutally honest, and I felt it really was. The response I've gotten, which I know is second party validation, but the positive response I've gotten from doing that has just encouraged me to keep doing that. And that's a wonderful feeling, to feel good about showing those softer sides and showing those vulnerable sides. So that's been the most dramatic change in my life from this experience. Is really, as someone said, you set out to fall in love with a woman and you fell in love with yourself. I was like, wow, that's a great line. I need to use that.
Put that on the back. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's awesome. Because like you said, all this stuff's gonna be there, but it doesn't have to control you in the same way it did before.
Right.
And you don't have to be afraid of it in the same way that you were before, right? Because you said, like, you stared it in the face, you kind of like barked it down. You're like, okay, this is who I am. This is just like a glitch in my brain. This is just a bug. It's just something that's there. It doesn't like mean anything other than the fact that just some neurons that are just firing, based on a lot of childhood experience.
I say my brain is fucking with
yourself. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like it's just going through old patterns and kind of just like cycling, So whatever happened to Jane? I guess you were talking about her in the past,
Right. Like the relationship ran its course. We were together 10 years. I'm kind of giving away the ending, but that's okay. We're still very close friends. And she actually helped. She was of paramount importance in me writing this book. When she found out I was writing it, she was all in, which is great. I mean, she's a psychologist. She's a relationship coach. She's a sex educator. So she felt it was a good thing to write. She felt my journey had value. So yeah, I think I was talking to her this morning, actually. She lives not too far from me here in New York City. So yeah, we're very close. But our relationship ended right around the pandemic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let me ask you this, right? Because we've had people have talked about non-monogamy before, and I think it's currently up for debate if people are polyamorous, like if they're born that way, similar to sexuality. Some people are born polyamorous, some people are not born polyamorous, or if it's like actually a more natural state of human being, right? That kind of everybody's polyamorous, but you have to, get through your own barriers in order to actually feel that and be able to connect to it. Do you have a sense? Do you have an opinion on either of those options, or do you have another?
Well, okay. So I lived with a sex scientist for 10 years, so I have a lot of opinions.
Got some data on this one.
Got some data. According to, well, first I want to back up 1 second. Polyamory and non-monogamy aren't necessarily the same thing. Polyamory refers to actually being in a committed or loving relationship with more than one person, and then people use non-monogamy to I think to label people who sleep with more than one person, even though you can have a primary relationship. And what Jane and I practiced was the second. We were primary partners. There was just sexual escapades with other partners. So I just want to make that distinction.
That's helpful.
Yeah. Terminology is important. And the science behind that I was told by Jane, and I'm going on science from 6-7 years ago, was that it was still up for debate. That when they looked at data, humans exhibited qualities of monogamy and non-monogamy, and it was very much dependent on the person, similar to the way an orientation is dependent on the person. And I think that when people start looking at it as an orientation, I think there's a lot of stigma will probably will come away. Are you a person who seeks more safety, or are you a person who seeks more excitement? Do you want the security of relationship, or do you want the excitement of novelty? And understanding who you are, I think, will play a big role into where your proclivities are around that. Did that answer the question?
It does. Yeah. And that's another one, right? Because it sounds like you were or are, right, like a risk seeker, a thrill seeker. So it sounds like from that idea that non-monogamy is just a part of that, right? If it's just part of your personality as somebody who's seeking novelty and seeking new experience.
Yeah, I came out from that relationship saying, okay, I don't really want to do that like that ever again. It was, I mean, the book gets into pretty crazy, wild sex parties and all kinds of fun, salacious stuff. But that was a
save those for the readers, the people can buy it.
Yeah. Right. I've decided that I do really like having a partner. I want one partner, but the thought of only having sex with that person for the rest of my life is probably would not be cool. I need a little excitement now and again, but it should be the occasional treat, not the main event of a relationship. So that's kind of where I've landed. Some flexibility, but not a primary whatever.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts because I work with a lot of people that are considering divorce, right? A lot of guys go to therapy because they're on the verge of divorce. And what I hear is a lot of this. It's a lot of people saying, they're at their 7-year itch or something, right? Like they're seeking novelty. They're wanting to have sex with another person. They're feeling bored. And I'm always confused what to do about that, right? Because I think there's one therapy angle, which is okay, be more vulnerable, be more open. There's always so much more between two people, right? And then there's another kind of angle, which is you might get bored, right? The relationship might just change. It might not be what it was before. And it's more about accepting that boredom rather than continuing to dig deeper. I'm curious, yeah. And also I guess as a side note, a lot of the solutions that people are coming up with now, especially because, non-monogamy and polyamory are kind of in this upswing. It's we'll just open our marriage, right? That's the answer to this problem is we'll just open our marriage. It's never the answer. It actually just usually results in divorce or destroying the marriage. So yeah, I guess I'm curious, do you also see that and what do you think about that idea?
I mean, I'm absolutely not a therapist. I'm a construction worker at heart, I guess. But I've gotten a lot of email. I've been emailing. I get a lot of emails from guys who've read the book and are in that sort of same space where I'll get an email like that, how do I do? And I want to be very clear, and I'm clear with them. I am not a therapist. And also that opening up a relationship is not a way to save a relationship any more than having a baby is a way to save a relationship, because I hear people doing that too. But it is a way to have more life satisfaction if that is what your relationship can handle. And whether or not your relationship can handle that's dependent on the people that are in the relationship, not on any, on any magic. Oh, non-monogamy is good, non-monogamy is bad. And I'm also in the book. I'm very clear. It's not a celebration nor a cautionary tale. It's just how it is, what two people did. And understanding who your partner is and having compassion for your partner as someone who has their own human experience. If you and your partner don't have that for each other, why are you in a relationship with that person? And if you do have that for each other, then talking about these things should be part of that. And that's what I tell people. It's if you can't even talk to your partner about your desires, that's something that needs to be looked at first, right? And first get to a point where you can have communication and acceptance. Just because I feel something doesn't mean it's your fault, doesn't mean it has anything to do with you. So that's what I always tell people. I'm look, learn how to have empathy, learn how to be able to talk to your partner. And once you get to that point, then you can start pushing the boundaries of, well, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And very often, and again, I'm not a relationship therapist, but I lived with one. She would often recommend to people that sometimes just talking about things gets the emotion out, that you don't have to do it. She encouraged couples, talk about sleeping with other people. Just talk about it, and maybe just play around with it when you're together, if your relationship is strong enough to handle that. And very often that helps scratch that itch, because we all want to be seen. We don't want to have to hide who we are. And I think that when, at least the men that I've talked to, when they feel they're hiding who they are, they can't be their authentic selves, it's not a satisfying way to live.
Right. Yeah, you're cutting off part of your limbs just to kind of fit into a box, And I think that's great advice. It's work on the foundation in that way of having more open communication, because I think it's not going to save it. It's going to add complexity, and it requires quite a strong foundation to survive more complexity in the relationship, And
I will say, it can make it way better. It can't save it, but it can make it. I mean, I guess it could save it if I'm not going to say never, but it can if you and your partner decide to embark on that journey, and you do it in a really healthy way where you're supporting each other and understand that mistakes happen and you'll process it can really amplify your relationship in such a great way. I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it destroy relationships as well. So it's all depends on how the participants handle themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it's just like you're playing with fire, right? So like make sure you can handle fire, right? Like it's great if you can harness it, and if you can't, it can burn your house down, you know.
But that's also another thing too, is that mistakes get made, and you have to go in with that idea. In the book, I talk about like rules or guideline or guardrails that you'll put on your relationship, and if you want to get uncomfortable, sometimes we go past a guardrail. Let's see what it's like. And in the book, there's an event where I had a hard rule: no close friends, no close friends. My friendships are too important to me. And eventually something happens in the book, and she asks if she can cross that line with someone. And things have been going pretty well. And I said, okay, let's try it. And we did it, and it didn't work out well for me. So I said, you know what, we're going to pull that back. We're going to go back. It didn't work out well. I don't like it. I want to put that guardrail back in place. And we did. So you have to be okay with understanding if you're playing with fire, you will sometimes get burned, but all getting burned means is that you've proven something about yourself that you thought, right? I think I'm not okay with this. Oh, yep, I'm not. We're not going to do that again.
Turns out I was right. Yeah, this sucks, but I'm right. You know,
I was wrong about a lot of other things, so I want to be very clear. I was wrong about so much, but I was right about that.
Yeah. So I want to kind of pull the camera back a little bit and just talk about risks, seeking the risk in general, right? And you say seek the risk, and the other part, right, is like not the reward. So what would you say to people that are reward focused? Because I see that also unbelievably common. I think our culture is all about accomplishment, right, and about status and things like that. So, like, I guess what would you say about how do you disconnect from pursuing rewards?
Right. And again, I used to call it my climbing partner and I and friends in the extreme sports world, we always called it trophy bagging. We'd like sneer at, those guys are trophy baggers. They're just going for the trophy. And so to me, trophy bagging is all about second party validation, right? You get the trophy to put on your mantle, and I want to show off my trophy. So everyone comes in, they're going to be impressed with me. And it's really powerful. And I say this as someone who battled that my entire life. I still find myself battling with it. This second party, looking for that reward, looking for that trophy. And, what do you say to guys? I don't know what to say other than, man, it's so much better on the other side. Because once you start doing it for you, man, the life satisfaction gets so much better. You're not just chasing the next trophy. Having the trophy is momentary. Seeking the experience you get by trying to achieve the goal lasts a lifetime. And the more you sink into the experience, as you're hunting the experience rather than going for the trophy in your bag, I can't emphasize enough what a better life it seems to be. Anyway, I have yet to find a data point that says the other.
Yeah.
But it's a hard choice. It can be hard to it can be really hard to let go of that. I get it. You want that validation, but man, it's better on the other side.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like, to build that, I think like you get a different type of validation. If you're really present and you let these experiences touch you and change you, and you become a person that in the moment with people is charismatic or is attractive or is grounding or protective, or all the kind of masculine things you were talking about before, right? Rather than just like bragging, I mean, how many guys have you met that like, they are trophy seekers, trophy baggers, but like, they don't have a personality, right? They haven't been moved by anything. They just have that like Rolodex of accomplishments. I think for those guys, I work with a lot of them. Like, I think they feel really lonely because they're like, well, I got all the merit badges. Like, where's my family? Where's my children? Where's my, all the love that I want? Where's all the stuff that I was supposed to get to be able to cash in my, tickets and get the prize? And it just doesn't work that way. And I think that's a hard truth. I think a lot of people need to learn. It's like, there is no exchange rate.
That's great. There's no exchange rate. I love that.
There's no exchange rate. Yeah.
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 Now I always call that, when I meet guys like that, I refer to it the me monster, right? Me, look what I did. Look at me. The guy who always wants to one up you with a story or whatever. And I do. I feel empathy for them because they're not sinking into their experiences. They're sinking into their accomplishments.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so as we're moving towards the end here, I want to ask a question that I ask to, most of my guests here is, you talked a lot about masculinity in your book. And I'm curious what message you have for young men in particular. So we're talking, 16, 18, 22 at the most, guys that are right now trying to figure out what it means to be a man. If you could be their digital mentor for a moment, right? Like, what would you say to them, or what advice or direction or even a practice could you give them to help them answer some of these questions that they might have?
Yeah, that's, man. I mean, I guess it'd be nice to know their questions, but young
if the question is like, what does it mean to be a man?
Right. What does it mean to be a man?
Someone who's feeling
I guess, yeah. So I'll guess I'll tell a little story, even though it's kind of around the non-monogamy, but it explains, I think it explains what, one of the things I used to say, or one of the things I really try to exemplify as what it means to be a man. When this whole thing went down of me coming out as monogamous online, one of my absolute best friends, judged me so harshly for it, and I was a cuckold man, and that hurt a lot. But I knew that I was living in a way, I was making a choice that was authentic to who I was. And even though I was getting rejected by the people I cared about the most, I sank back into that belief. Hey, I'm making a decision that reflects who I am, and who I am is curious about this, and I'm going to do it. And then a number of years later, 8, 9, 10 years later, same guy comes back to me, and he was like, look, you are a far stronger man than I am for doing what you did. He's like, I never could have done that, and I'm sorry. And to me, that was the essence of masculinity to me, of being just like, hey, I am going to be strong. I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to be there. I'm going to support the people that I believe in. I supported Jane in being who she wanted to be, and friends and family saw me as someone they could count on, someone who stood up for what I believed in. And so I think there's a lot of masculinity themes in that. At some level, I felt like her protector because society was judging her so harshly, and I was standing up for her, even in the face of a lot of criticism. I want to be that man. I want to be, yeah. And it's interesting, at 18 or even 20, I don't know if I could have been that man. I think that, first of all, growing into being a man, I think is a lifelong journey. I still don't think I'm the man I want to be. I'm still trying to become that man. At 18, I was so far away from that. Yeah. And I don't even know, I honestly don't even know if I was evolved enough at that age to wrap my brain around it. Now I know that men that are 18 today are very different. That, I'm a Gen Xer, born in 1970. So the ideas I had around masculinity were very different from what guys today are growing up with. So I imagine that they will be better at this than I was. I hope so, because if they are, there'll be a lot bigger pool of great men out there. And I know I have heard that that age group, I guess the Gen Xers, the Gen Zers, tend to be more on the soft side. So I guess I would say to them, if you think that's who you are, push yourself. Go do things that scare you. Go do whatever it is. Go start pushing yourself. Start getting out there. Start being forced to confront emotions you don't like. And yeah, I think whoever we are, I had to push the opposite direction. I had to push into my vulnerability. If you're too much on the emotional side, push into your toughness more. Push more towards the toxic side. I'm not saying be toxic, but go more towards that end of the spectrum. Until we get out of our comfort zone, it's all about getting out of our comfort zones, wherever that comfort zone is.
Yeah, I like that a lot, right? And yeah, like your comfort zone was more the emotional realm, and these guys' comfort zone might be more the physical realm, right? And seeking that risk in that way. And that's really well said. Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people learn more about you, and where can they pick up the book?
Yeah, so I've got a website for the book. It's seektherisk.net. Seektherisk.net, and there's also a link to a blog I've kept writing. I've fallen in love with writing, and I have quit my jobs, and now I write full time, and I've been absolutely loving it. I've been lucky enough in my life that I've been able to do that now. So yeah, seektherisk.net. There's links there. You can to buy the book on Barnes & Noble or Amazon. There's audiobook links in there. If you're a Spotify subscriber, it's free with your paid subscription. You get to hear me and Jane read our parts in the book, so it's kind of fun. So yeah, and if you'd like to email me, adam@seektherisk.net. I love hearing from people, and yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Yeah, well, all that stuff will be in the show notes. We'll have all the links to buy the book and everything, as well as email address to contact them. So really pick it up. It's a great read. Give it to someone that you think needs that message and needs to hear more of this. Send them this podcast episode. And before we leave, feel free to do all the socials, like, subscribe, do all of that. Really helps. We're looking to build more 5-star reviews on Apple and Spotify specifically. So if you can drop some of those, it really helps support the show and get the message out to guys that need to hear it. So thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.